Hey Wellness Warriors, welcome to the Wellness Revolution. I'm your host, Dr. Milan Riabe. And today's topic is detoxification, spring cleaning for your body. So we're going to talk about a fairly controversial topic, right? There's a lot of controversy in mainstream medicine as to whether or not cleanses are useful, as to whether or not colonics are useful, intermittent fasting. And so that leaves people, very confused as to whether or not they should be doing cleanses and detoxing their bodies or just relying on their own body's natural mechanisms. And so today we're going to take the mystery out of that. In my 20 some odd years of practice, have run into a lot of, you know, people who have done cleanses on their own and unfortunately overdone them or done them when they weren't indicated, and unfortunately felt much worse doing the cleanses. And I see this a lot. They get into this trap where they feel toxic, and so they do a cleanse. And initially they start to feel a bit better, although it took a lot of energy to get through the cleanse, but they made it. And they feel a little bit better, but then they start feeling toxic again right away. They think they need to do another cleanse. They think that, maybe I didn't do my cleanse long enough. Let me do another week or two. And then they end up actually feeling worse and worse and worse. We're going to show you today exactly how to figure out if you need a cleanse, and if so, what the best methods might be. So it turns out there's a fairly easy way to tell if you need a cleanse, and that's to know your dynamic metabolic type. And so as you know, there are 6 dynamic metabolic types that you can tell very quickly which one you fall into by answering 5 simple questions through our burnout assessment. And so the burnout assessment is not just for burnout, it's to figure out a lot of things. So in our online course, I teach people how to use the burnout assessment for other things, like how to figure out if you need to cleanse or not to cleanse. And so oftentimes I see with my clients, they're very confused as to whether or not they should cleanse, and some of them have unfortunately done cleanses, feeling toxic because they were toxic. But the problem is they did the cleanse in a way that was detrimental to themselves, not knowing, because they weren't aware of their dynamic metabolic type. And so you can be toxic, but unfortunately very depleted as well. And so oftentimes people become toxic because they're depleted, because they're missing really critical things in their bodies that the body needs to perform its detoxification functions, and that's what allows the toxins to accumulate. And so it's really important to know if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type or an excess dynamic metabolic type, because that's the number one differentiator, to tell you if a cleanse is indicated or a detox is indicated or not. And so while cleanses on the surface seem, harmless enough, they can do quite a bit of damage if the person doing them is too depleted to tolerate them. And unfortunately, it's really hard to tell if when you do a cleanse, if it's maybe that you didn't do it long enough or that it was the wrong cleanse. And so I have a lot of clients, by the time they come to see me, they've been trying cleanses for some time, not realizing that the cleanses were actually more harmful than helpful to them. Why? Because they were a deficient dynamic metabolic type. Through our burnout assessment, you ask yourself the 5 questions, right? So what's your number when you wake up? What's your energy level when you wake up in the morning on a scale of 1 to 10? 1, you're too exhausted to get out of bed. 10, you can bounce out and do whatever you want. You can still have burnout and fatigue and be toxic even if you wake up at 10, believe it or not. I have people that say they're not tired when they wake up, but they need to keep moving around all day to feel good. Otherwise they fall asleep, they feel sluggish. Those are excess dynamic metabolic types. How do we know? Is they wake up at 10, but they feel worse when they sit still, or if they take a nap or fall asleep, they'll feel worse when they wake up. Why? Because they have too much energy in the form of inflammation and toxins. Those types of, those forms of energy are not, good forms of energy, if you will. They are forms of energy that are detrimental to the body. So they're toxins, they're heavy metals, they can be plastics, they can be estrogen mimickers, and just garden variety toxins that we're exposed to each and every day, coupled with inflammation. So that will give you a sense of feeling sluggish and heavy when you sit still. People with an excess dynamic metabolic type need to move around a lot. So they'll say, if I don't get my workouts in, I feel terrible. If I miss a workout, I feel horrible. Or I'll fall asleep at work if I don't keep moving around. If I don't get up and keep moving around, I don't feel good. These people have an excess dynamic metabolic type. They're the ones who will most benefit from cleanses and detoxes. Now, that's not to say that if you have a deficiency dynamic metabolic type, that you're not toxic, right? You can have a combination, but be predominantly deficient. If you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you're more likely to wake up tired. You might wake up at 3 or 4 or 5 and go downhill from there as the day goes by. You might be the one that says, yeah, if I can take a nap, I feel so much better. If I can, rest, I feel better. If I exercise, I actually feel worse unless I go really slow and take it really easy. Or you might even say, I'm too tired to actually work out. Those people are deficient dynamic metabolic types, and a cleanse or a detox is not advised under those circumstances, even though you probably have toxins because you're too depleted to move them properly and to rid yourself of them. So for those people, cleansing and detoxing is not recommended, but we'll talk about what you can still do to not only correct the deficient dynamic metabolic type, but in so doing, actually remove the toxins just naturally by replacing the things that are missing in your metabolism that are causing them to accumulate in the first place. And so once you know if you're an excess or a deficient dynamic metabolic type, and again, you're welcome to go to awakenwellnessnow.com, download our burnout assessment so you know exactly which of the 6 dynamic metabolic types you are. Again, the 2 broad categories are excess and deficient. And then on the excess side, you can have a hot excess, a cold excess, and a temperature neutral excess. And similarly, on the deficient dynamic metabolic on the deficient dynamic metabolic type side, you can have also hot deficient, cold deficient, and temperature neutral deficient. Now, if you're an excess dynamic metabolic type and you fall into the hot excess dynamic metabolic type, here's what you should do to cleanse and detox. So knowing that you're a hot dynamic metabolic type is telling you some really important things to help you know, like, what's the best strategy to remove toxins from your body. So when you're a hot excess dynamic metabolic type, what that means is that you are accumulating acidity and that you're too acidic. Now, you may not see that on testing. So if you have a urine test, for example, that measures pH, it may be normal. It may be normal even on swabs of your mouth and things like that, or blood work. Sometimes we'll check pHs in blood work. It'll almost always be normal because, again, the acidity is on a cellular level. It's not necessarily that your bloodstream is too acidic or anything of that nature. It's really that the insides of the cells are producing acids. And there are very specific reasons for that, and that is mostly because the cells, if they can't use oxygen efficiently, they will make as a byproduct lactic acid and alcohol. And of course, alcohol is very drying, and lactic acid is also very drying. And so these people will feel hot because acids are hot. And when you look at how your body makes and uses energy, it goes through a cycle called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And every single cell in your body has to perform this cycle in order to properly function, in order to make the energy that it's going to need to do whatever it is that it needs to do. In this case, we're talking about detoxification and removal of waste. And so if the body can't run that cycle for any reason, if there are any groups of cells in your body that can't run the cycle efficiently, you won't make the energy to power detoxification. So heavy metals are a huge problem now. Unfortunately, we're seeing increased exposures to heavy metals with the computer industry. Some experts are suggesting that the metals being produced by the computer industry are going to be worse than the oil industry in terms of pollution of our environment. And so what we're seeing is a lot of heavy metal toxicity now. We're seeing a resurgence of lead. We were already seeing a lot of mercury. We're still seeing that. We're seeing aluminum. I've been seeing a lot of tungsten lately, which is typically something that you'll find on fishing weights and golf clubs and darts. But again, these things are used a lot in the making of servers and computers and chips and things like that. And so we're seeing a resurgence of many metals. Aluminum is another one I've been seeing, arsenic. And so these types of metals are very, very dangerous because they pretty much like gunk up the mechanism, and your body cannot run the citric acid or the Krebs cycle to make energy because the heavy metals just kind of wedge in the cycle and they literally block the cycle from being done. Now, obviously, it's not going to block every single cell in your body, right? It's going to block the cells that are accumulating the metals. And metals tend to accumulate a lot in the liver and other fatty tissues such as the brain. And so, the cells that are in those systems tend to be the most vulnerable to heavy metals. And the liver is critical because it is the defense system for your bloodstream. So anything that ends up in your bloodstream, any form of waste, any heavy metals, garden variety toxins like plastics and estrogen mimickers and things of that nature, as soon as they end up in your bloodstream, and also anything that your body has used and now is putting in the bloodstream to be transported to the liver, if the liver has heavy metal toxicity in it, it's going to be very burdened in performing its detoxification functions. And so you're going to accumulate acidity, you're going to accumulate inflammation, and that is going to create massive problems. So you can have joint pain, muscle aches, weight gain, fatigue, brain fog, many things, including even the risk of cancer from those toxins not being properly removed from the body. And so heavy metals are a huge thing to make sure you don't have if you have an excess dynamic metabolic type. There are several different ways to check for heavy metals. The gold standard based on functional medicine is urine. And you will want to use a substance that will kind of force the metals out. So you can use an antioxidant such as glutathione, for example, or N-acetylcysteine that creates more glutathione in your body. That will kind of nudge the metals out. We have to kind of dislodge the metals from where they're trapped so that we can detect them and find them on their way out of the body through the urine. Again, your body does not want metals in your bloodstream because that's the most dangerous place for them to be. And so blood work is not the best tool to find heavy metal toxins for that reason. And then we can capture them in the urine to know that there's a load of those metals in the body. And then we would use either chelation, and there are also some really great traditional Chinese medicine herbal formulas that are designed to remove heavy metals from the body quite safely. And so doing a cleanser, a detox, in the presence of heavy metals is going to be challenging because the heavy metals require specific procedures that are a little bit more involved than just a cleanse and would require treatment for several months in most cases in order to safely and effectively remove those metals from your body. So if you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, you want to make sure that part of that excess, part of those toxins and what's driving that inflammation that's making you an excess dynamic metabolic type is not heavy metals. And so again, if you have heavy metals lodged in the cells, your cells can't run the citric acid in the Krebs cycle. Normally what happens is your body will take in food, take in oxygen that will go into each and every one of your cells everywhere in your body. It will be utilized through the cycle, the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle. What powers that cycle are vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and antioxidants. And so vitamin and mineral deficiencies will make it very difficult to power this cycle to make energy. But if you're fully loaded, you have all your vitamins, your minerals, the amino acids, the antioxidants, you've got your fats, your proteins, your carbs, and you have oxygen coming into the cell, and the cell can use those things, you're going to make what's called ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's like money. So it's the currency that the body uses in order to exchange for body function. And the byproduct of that, so your body's making this ATP, and the byproduct is going to be carbon dioxide and water. So we recycle a lot of our water through the proper making of energy in each and every one of our cells. So if there's something gunking up the mechanism, blocking the Krebs cycle, heavy metals in this case, or large numbers of toxins and plastics and things like that, and your body cannot run the citric acid cycle to make the ATP currency that it needs, there's a backup, just in case. There's this backup where the body will be able to make energy, but a fraction of the same amount of energy. It doesn't use oxygen in that case. So if there are heavy metals gunking up the mechanism, the cells will not be able to drive oxygen into themselves. They will use the backup system to make the energy. The problem with that system is it's not supposed to be used long term, because you can only make 1/18 of the amount of energy through the backup system as you can through the regular system. So for every gram of glucose that comes into the cell, you're going to make 36 units of ATP with oxygen. So if that cycle is running properly, the citric acid Krebs cycle is running properly, you're going to make 36 units of ATP, and the byproduct of that is going to be the carbon dioxide and the water. If you're using the backup system, the cell does not use oxygen under those circumstances. So it is undergoing what we call anaerobic respiration. So in other words, I'm making energy without any oxygen. And what happens there is you only make 2 units of ATP instead of 36. So it's 1/18 the amount. So it's a fraction, a small fraction of the amount of energy that can be made under those circumstances. And then to add insult to injury, the byproduct of that is the lactic acid and the alcohol that we were talking about just a moment ago. And so now your body's making a fraction of energy, pumping out this acid that's toxic to itself. So this is like a deep-seated lactic acid. It's not like the lactic acid that we feel, when we're exercising and we've reached our maximum weight and our muscles start to burn. It's not that lactic acid. It is a deep-seated metabolic type of a lactic acid that's happening deep inside the cells that you don't even know is actually happening. So one of the ways to know that is you start feeling warm. Like, you'll run through the burnout assessment, and the last question where it says, do you feel hot, cold, or even, when you compare yourself to most other people, you're going to be the one that says, I feel kind of hot all the time. I'm the one that, is always taking off my jacket when everybody else is cold, or I'm the one that's always fighting to turn on the air conditioner when nobody else thinks we need it. My temperature runs a little bit warm, like my doctor always thinks I'm sick because my temperature is always like 99. You're that person. So that's how you know that you're building up this lactic acid in your body, and you're going to feel warm. Now, there are other reasons for lactic acid buildup. In our last podcast, we talked about SIBO. The bacteria that cause SIBO can also make lactic acid and give you a sense of feeling warm, or a burning sensation, or even heartburn. This type of lactic acid from, for example, heavy metals, you're not going to necessarily have heartburn because it's not something involving directly the gastrointestinal system, but you will feel a little bit warm. So if you're that person, if you're the hot excess dynamic metabolic type, make sure that you get checked out for heavy metals. That's number one. In the absence of heavy metals, then a cleanse would be very, very helpful. In the case of a hot excess dynamic metabolic type, one of the most amazing diets for them is actually a raw vegan diet. So the raw vegan diet is a cooling and cleansing diet. It's something that you would do short term. It wouldn't necessarily be a long-term lifestyle type of a diet, but it's a strategy. And the strategy is, if I'm too hot, I need to cool myself down. Raw food, uncooked foods, especially when they're vegetables, green leafy veggies, and things like that, or similar foods to that, are going to really be very cooling because of their raw nature, and also they're just cooling in general. Things like lettuce, cucumber, celery, lemon. Lemon is acidic on the outside, but once it's ingested and it is digested, it becomes alkaline and it's actually cooling. Same thing with grapefruits and other citrus fruits. Tropical fruits are also alkaline, although they obviously have more calories. So if you're looking to just do a cleanse, green leafy veggies, cruciferous vegetables, things like that, even like vegan protein options, edamame, seitan, tofu, tempeh, those are all more cooling types of foods that will help you neutralize that acidity. So in traditional Chinese medicine, you do the opposite of what you are to regain balance. So if you're too hot, you want to cool yourself down with food. The other thing to do if you are a hot excess dynamic metabolic type that would be beneficial would be intermittent fasting as well. An excess dynamic metabolic type will thrive doing an intermittent fast because it's a draining type of diet, right? You're not eating for many hours of the day, and that's draining your energy because you're moving around, you're doing your things, so you're using up energy, but you're not consuming any energy. So it's a net loss of energy. And so this is a good strategy to cleanse out a system. And if you're a hot excess dynamic metabolic type, you're going to want to eat, again, foods that are cooling by their nature. And so same thing, lots of salads, greens drinks, green tea is another really good cooling beverage. Matcha tea, things that are kind of bland and boring tend to be very alkalinizing. So if you're hot, those are great things to cool you down. Peppermint tea is also alkalinizing. Dandelion tea, chamomile tea, these are all things that are cooling. Lemongrass, these are all great strategies to remove acid from the body if you're a hot excess. Now, if you are a cold excess dynamic metabolic type, you don't want to cool yourself down more. You're going to make yourself worse if you do that. You're going to slow down your metabolism and cause yourself more harm than good. So for you, you could do a vegan diet, but you'd want it to be cooked foods and a little bit spicy. So if you're too cold, you actually want to warm yourself up. So you do the opposite of what you are. And if you're cold, you're the one that says, yeah, I feel cold compared to other people. Like I'm the one with the jacket on. I'm the one who doesn't want the AC turned on when everybody else does. So you're the one that's cold. You might say my temperature is even a little bit too low. I run like 97 and change, or I've had some clients even run at 96. They're way too cold. And so you want to do the opposite. So you want things that are well cooked, spicy. So bone broth cleanses would be really great with spices, cayenne pepper, ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, fennel. Ghee is actually very warming, so you could cook with ghee. You can do like stir-fried green leafy veggies, for example, or just put them in the broth. Now, for biological males and biological females, you want to be a little bit careful. Biological females, we're just made differently. We're just built different, as my daughter would say. And so we are, not built as much for the intermittent fast as a genetic male would be. And so what I recommend to my female clients who want to do intermittent fasting because they have an excess dynamic metabolic type, I recommend that they flip the times that they fast so that you're eating early in the day and stopping your meals earlier, like late afternoon, for example. So for example, start eating at 8 o'clock in the morning and stop eating at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that way you've got your 8 hours of and then the 16 hours of fasting are occurring from 4 p.m. until, overnight until 8 a.m. the next day. The advantage of that is that you're not going to overdrain yourself. Because we tend to be a little bit more blood deficient as biological females due to, our menstruation patterns, or we get pregnant, we breastfeed, all of this uses blood, but what really drains us is the monthly menstrual cycles. And so we tend to kind of be running, on 3/4 tank of gas instead of a full one, even though we're doing intermittent fasting, even though we have an excess dynamic metabolic type. So for females, I do recommend that you do what I call reverse intermittent fasting, and not the regular kind that's popularly done. So that's the only nuance that I would add in terms of intermittent fasting. What other things can you do? Exercise is a great way to um, drain the body out. So high intensity interval training is really good for that. Spin class, things that are of high intensity, boot camps, those types of things are going to drain you. And those things would be highly recommended as a draining mechanism or a cleansing mechanism for anyone who has an excess dynamic metabolic type, whether it's hot, cold, or temperature neutral. Now, another one for the cold excess that's really great is infrared saunas. So the skin is a great detoxification tool as well. And the infrared sauna brings infrared frequencies of light through the skin into the body to dislodge through sweating, basically dislodge toxins and use the skin as a detoxification system and get things out. It actually goes fairly deep into the body as well, and so the whole musculoskeletal system can be very well cleansed, and really systemically, it's not so much limited to the musculoskeletal system. It goes fairly deep into the body and assists the other detoxification mechanisms to work better too. So the infrared and the heat is great if you have a cold excess dynamic metabolic type. Not so great if you have a hot excess dynamic metabolic type. Another thing I advise against is hot yoga. Like, you definitely don't want to do hot yoga if you have a hot excess dynamic metabolic type. But if you have a cold excess dynamic metabolic type, hot yoga is amazing for you. So you're going to be balancing yourself because you're making making the cold more balanced, because you're heating yourself up in a hot room and you're moving, doing hot yoga. And so you're going to be able to drain out those toxins much more efficiently. And we also detox at night. So that's when all of the actual detoxification methods in the body like kick in and start really removing toxins. So the things we do during the day are preparing us so that when we go to sleep, the things that we have assimilated in our bodies are now going to be utilized overnight in order for the detoxification systems to actually package up the toxins, get them ready, and to be removed from the body when we wake up the following morning. So all of the actual detox systems, the gallbladder, the liver, the large intestine, the lungs, even the skin, the gastrointestinal system, I think I mentioned that already, they are all operating at night to remove waste and toxins from our bodies. So sleep is critical. So if you're an excess dynamic metabolic type, you don't need to have any quote-unquote extra sleep. So for men, biological males, it would be 7 hours. For biological females, it would be 8. So those are essentially the bare minimum of sleep that you need so that the detoxification systems and the restoration systems of your body have time to be operational at night and fully working on all cylinders. And so this is one of the main reasons that sleep is so important for the body. Can't fix it while we're running around all day. All we can really do is eat and move around and prepare the body to be in a state for proper detoxification at night. And so that's for the excess dynamic metabolic type. Now, if you're temperature neutral, you can do a little bit of all of it. So temperature neutral people don't feel hot, they don't feel cold, they're kind of right in the middle. They're in that Goldilocks zone, but they still have an excess dynamic metabolic type. So you can actually mix and match things. You could do a raw vegan diet and also do, cooked vegan meals. So you could do, broths and with lots of veggies put in there. If you don't even have, it doesn't have to be vegan. You can use bone broth, you can use chicken broth. These are all things, these are all strategies that you can use if you're a temperature neutral dynamic metabolic type. Then you don't have all the restrictions. You could do hot yoga, you could do intermittent fasting, you could do infrared saunas and things of that nature. So these are all strategies that are wide open for temperature neutral dynamic metabolic types. And the others, who are hot or cold excess, need to just be a little bit careful so that you don't imbalance yourself doing anything. So that's for the excess dynamic metabolic types. And also you can do an actual cleanse that you can get, I recommend that you get it from a trusted source, of course, asking your functional medical doctor or your doctor of oriental medicine would be a great place to start, to ask them like what detoxification systems that they use. You can do a cleanse for anywhere from 7 days to up to about 28 days. And again, you want to do that under some guidance. You don't want to be kind of winging it on your own. But 7 days is usually quite safe for anyone to do who's an excess dynamic metabolic type. Now, as far as whether or not you should extend it to 14, 21, or 28 days, you want to be very, very cautious and do that, under, again, some guidance with a practitioner who is familiar with cleanses and detoxification systems. As to how long you would do cleanses for, if you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, if you're doing things like infrared saunas, then you want to do them in spurts. So infrared sauna studies show that more is best. So doing them consistently, at least 5 days a week for 30 minutes, up to a temperature of about 130, 140 degrees is recommended. That's better than like sitting in a sauna for 2 hours a couple times a week. It's the consistency that really does the work in terms of the infrared saunas. Again, you can monitor yourself by doing the burnout assessment so that you don't want to over cleanse yourself with any methodology. Also, if you're a cold dynamic metabolic type, at some point you're going to balance out. So you want to be just cautious that you are not overutilizing anything that brings you over the edge to the other side, right? So you don't want to get too hot either. So you never want to overdo things. You always want to be very moderate in your approaches and monitor your dynamic metabolic type to know if you're starting to become more, neutral. Obviously, if you feel too cold, once you start feeling even with your temperature, you're kind of hitting the end of whatever method you're using, and you want to then slow it down. Same thing for a hot excess dynamic metabolic type. When you're not feeling as hot anymore and you're more like neutral, okay, I'm kind of getting where I need to go. I don't want to overdo this. So again, you can discuss this with a practitioner who is an expert in detoxification so that you can get a sense of whether or not it's time to quit or if you could continue to go a little bit further. Now, obviously, if you go through the burnout assessment and you're still an excess dynamic metabolic type, then you can still do some cleanses and detoxifications, but again, very, very carefully. And always check in with your medical practitioner as well. So moving on to the deficient dynamic metabolic type. So again, we have the categories of hot deficient, cold deficient, and temperature neutral deficient. So now the thing that's common to them all is obviously that they're all deficient dynamic metabolic types. This is critical to distinguish from the excess dynamic metabolic type, because the excess dynamic metabolic type is safe to do a cleanse. It's safe to drain the body out. In the case of a deficient dynamic metabolic type, it's not safe to do at all. In fact, you can make yourself even worse and cause yourself to accumulate even more toxins and become even more depleted if you force yourself to drain or to remove toxins without being properly supported. So how do you know you're deficient dynamic metabolic type? When you do the burnout assessment, you're going to be the one that wakes up a little bit tired, and that's going to get worse as the day goes by. It would get better if you rested. So one of the questions is, do you feel better or worse when you take a nap or rest? So someone who's a deficient dynamic metabolic type almost always says, I feel much better if I can nap. Yeah, if I can just relax for a bit, I feel rejuvenated and I'm good to go for the rest of the day. That's the person who's the deficient dynamic metabolic type. They'll be the ones that say, yeah, if I work out, moderately, or if I push myself, I'm going to be exhausted or feel like I got hit by a truck the following morning. Or they'll say, too tired to work out. I don't work out. Right? That's a clear deficient dynamic metabolic type. And again, the next step is to know, okay, am I a hot deficient, a cold deficient, or a temperature neutral deficient, as we discussed earlier for the excess dynamic metabolic types. It's the same questions, except now you're going to categorize yourself as a hot deficient, cold deficient, or temperature neutral deficient. So a deficient dynamic metabolic type needs to build themselves up not drain themselves out. So the reason that this particular category of people are fatigued is because they don't have enough of what they need to power the body. So it's not that things are being obstructed and they can't make the energy, it's that things are missing and they can't make the energy. So if we go back to the Krebs cycle, the proteins, the fats, the carbs, the oxygen, and all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, antioxidants that are necessary to run the Krebs cycle, any number of those things might be missing in the case of a deficient dynamic metabolic type. So either that they're not eating enough, or they may not be absorbing their nutrients enough, or they're just burning the candle at both ends and they're not meeting their demands, and so the supply is dwindling, they have too much stress. That will dwindle their resources in the body, drop their metabolism, and now the body can't make enough of the ATP because the ingredients are missing and they just can't make it happen. Now, again, the same problem happens there, right? So they're depleted, they're exhausted, and then now their detoxification systems can't function, so they're going to be also accumulating toxins and inflammation. So it's not that a deficient dynamic metabolic type has no toxins and no inflammation. It's just that that's not the dominant problem that they have. It's the dominant problem for the excess dynamic metabolic type, because that's what's literally making them an excess dynamic metabolic type. But in the case of the deficient dynamic metabolic type, the toxins are secondary to the deficiency. So it's important to treat the deficiency in order to help the body to then have the things that it needs to run the cycle, to make the ATP, to make the currency, to make the energy that would then power the body's natural detoxification systems. And so that's the difference. And you do not want to do a cleanse. You don't want to do anything that drains the body out. You want to do what builds the body up. And so for these people, you actually want to avoid fasting. You're the one that wants to eat often. So you don't need to increase your calories and eat often. You just need to spread them out. So you want to be eating roughly every 3 hours a light meal. And I know that sounds like a lot of work. It's not like you have to have an actual meal every 3 hours, but you need at least your 3 main meals and then a protein snack in between them somewhere, so that you're eating roughly every 3 hours. And you're powering your body with really good vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Again, green leafy veggies, a good bit of protein. And if you're, vegetarian, then it's eggs, it's seitan, it's tempeh, any number of other vegan protein options. It's green leafy veggies, cruciferous veggies, legumes, beans, peas. You can have some root vegetables as well. Again, you're not trying to overload on the calories, but you're having, a good breakfast. You're having a good lunch. You're having a good dinner, and then in the middle, it's a protein shake maybe, or something really easy to make that's very light. The key is simply to power the body and keep fueling the body, because it's missing things. So you want to make sure that you're pouring things into the body. Taking a good, reliable multivitamin is not a bad idea. Ideally, if you can be tested for vitamin and mineral deficiencies so that you know exactly what's missing, would be ideal. That way, then you can have a custom-made supplement regimen and custom-made nutrition to make sure that you're getting the foods that you need the most based on your micronutrient scores, so that you know exactly how much of each macronutrient you need, micronutrients, what is it that I need to pack into my food so that I fill up these deficiencies, so that I no longer have this deficient dynamic metabolic type. So one really wonderful way to do that is to have small, frequent meals. Even if you're not absorbing, ideally, if you have a small, easy to digest meal, you're going to have a much easier time of absorbing that food and filling those gaps in. And so that's the key, is small, frequent meals, so that you power the body's detoxification systems naturally, and then they just pick up and start functioning over time. So if you're a cold dynamic metabolic type, you want everything to be well cooked, warm, a little spicy, So that's where, again, all the spices come in: cayenne pepper, jalapenos, uh, ginger, garlic, onion, fennel, turmeric, curcumin. Like, these are really great spices that are warming. So if you're a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type, small frequent meals, very well cooked broths, soups, stews, like these are really great ways to warm the body back up, to rebalance that cold dynamic metabolic type, and to nourish the body so that you're tonifying or correcting all of the deficiencies that are present. If you're a hot deficient dynamic metabolic type, then you want to do more cooling food. So you don't want to do intermittent fasting or a raw vegan diet because those are draining. So you want to be very, very careful that you are still having things that are alkaline: green teas, matcha teas, peppermint, all the things we talked about earlier that are cooling. You want some salads that are a little bit raw. So you can have, like, as your main meal, some salads periodically, but make sure you have plenty of protein. And again, if you're vegetarian or vegan, you really have to double and triple up on your protein to make sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet. That's one of the biggest challenges for my vegan and vegetarian clients, is making sure that they have enough protein, especially if they're a deficient dynamic metabolic type. It's really critical to hit your protein requirements. Otherwise, your body can never get itself off the ground and correct the deficiencies. So again, you don't have to stuff yourself with food. They can be things that are simple to digest. Quick vegan protein shake in between your meals is perfect. They have like mushroom jerkies and different like vegan options now with organic jerkies and different things that you can do. And of course, if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, then you have the animal-based proteins. Make sure that they are organic, not genetically modified, wild-caught fish. Like, all these things are really critical. Make sure, again, that you're not bringing in toxins in your attempt to correct the deficiency dynamic metabolic type. And so that's the strategy for your pillar number one. For sleep, again, we detox when we sleep. So we're eating during the day to make sure that we're getting the nourishment into the body that the body's going to need to perform all the detox reactions overnight. So if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you have to be very cautious that you get enough sleep. And you need more sleep than you think when you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type. So if you're a biological male, you need to have an extra hour of sleep. So that's 8 hours for a biological male who has a deficient dynamic metabolic type. Whether it's hot, cold, or temperature neutral doesn't matter in this case. It's the fact that you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type that adds that extra hour of sleep requirement. That way your body has more time to restore itself and to build itself back up and to remove the toxins that have been just caked in because the body didn't have the energy to get it out of the way. And then also for biological females now, you actually need 9 hours of sleep if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type. So biological females need 8 hours of sleep just to maintain the status quo. So if you're kind of behind the 8 ball and you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, again, cold, hot, or temperature neutral doesn't matter, you need to add an extra hour of sleep every night, very consistently. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be every single night, but it has to be most nights if you want to get the benefit. So you want to make sure that you're getting 9 hours of sleep in so that the body can recover, remove toxins, and build its metabolism back up so that you're not accumulating toxins and damaging the metabolism further. And so temperature neutral, again, you have it a little bit easier, right? So you don't have the temperature restrictions to deal with. So you can mix and match raw, cooked, spicy, bland, doesn't matter there. The sleep is still the same, for you. And now movement's really important depending on dynamic metabolic type. So if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type and you're trying to move to help the body to remove toxins, you have to be very, very careful and do things that are more restorative and not draining. So again, you don't want to do high intensity interval training, long distance running, boot camps, spin classes. Those are for the excess dynamic metabolic types. For you, you want to be very restorative. So you want to do yin yoga, tai chi, qigong. You can do strength training for sure. Both of the classes of dynamic metabolic type can do that. So Pilates, circuit training, things like that are all fine. You just don't want to overdrain yourself. So you need to be sure that you're not like working out for 2 and 3 hours. Like you want to make sure you're in and out of the gym. You want to steal energy from your environment and try and give none away when you're doing exercises. So yin yoga, tai chi, qigong, you're literally stealing energy from your environment because you're building qi. And so it's a very restorative thing to do. Another really restorative way to detox yourself is through breath work. Now, it doesn't matter which dynamic metabolic type you are for breath work. If you're an excess dynamic metabolic type, everybody can benefit from breath work. But it's super important for people who are deficient dynamic metabolic type. The reason for that is because, again, when your cells have access to oxygen, they make 18 times the amount of energy. So it's not just a matter of making sure the nutrients get in, it's also making sure there's enough oxygen getting in. So a lot of us get trapped in the cycles of shallow breathing, with all the stress going on everywhere all the time. We end up like falling into this default shallow breathing mechanism. And although we don't feel short of breath, we're not pale, we're not turning blue, there are cracks and crevices inside of our bodies that will not get enough oxygen if we're shallow breathing. Because shallow breathing is a fight or flight response. It's not really how we're supposed to be in our default state. In our default state, we're supposed to take, fairly deep breaths, intermittently throughout the day. Now, obviously, if you're, running for the bus, or you're running to your car, or you get caught in a rainstorm and you're running, or you're exercising, you can't take, calming deep breaths. You're gulping air and you're doing what you need to do. But intermittently throughout the day, it's really important to take slow, deep breaths through the nostrils, where you're driving air all the way to the base of the lungs. There's a lot more surface area at the base of the lungs than at the top of the lungs, because they're somewhat triangular or bell-shaped. And so again, because we make 18 times as much energy when the cells have access to oxygen, it's important to take those deep breaths so that the cells that are like deep in the body that may not be getting oxygen if we're shallow breathing can get oxygen and make the energy that they need to make. Otherwise, it's really hard to get out of a deficient dynamic metabolic type if you're only making 1/18 of the amount of energy that you could otherwise be making. And so it's important. I would highly recommend heart math for people that have a deficient dynamic metabolic type. Again, anyone can do heart math, but it's especially important for deficient dynamic metabolic types. And so what else can we do to make sure that we're detoxing and optimizing our body's mechanisms that are in place? Obviously, we talked about pillar number 1, eating. Making sure that your food is as clean as possible is so important. Eating as organic as possible. The Environmental Working Group is a great resource. They have the Dirty Dozen list, the Clean 15 list. The Dirty Dozen is food you should not touch with a 10-foot pole unless it's organic. The Clean 15 is the list of things that don't have to be organic because the pesticide load is fairly low. And so that's a great resource. Another source of toxins, unfortunately, is just about everything else we have in our houses. And so it's really important, at least, one by one, as you run out of certain things like lotions. Makeup is a huge source of toxins. Making sure your makeup is organic, naturally sourced, is super important. Things you put on your skin, lotions, soaps, detergents, dishwashing liquid, all of these things, if you're not careful, they are in fact toxic. So you want to make sure that you're researching as you run out of things. So if you're running out of detergent, just hop on the ewg.org. They have an app you can download, and there are many other sites too. I just happen to really love the Environmental Working Group and what they do. I understand that there are many other wonderful organizations out there doing good work. And really mindfully guiding their consumers to healthier and more eco-friendly products. So any number of apps will be fine, but the Environmental Working Group is just one that I've used for many years. You can just check on it and look for cleaner products, and you just very slowly just replace the stuff running out with something a little bit cleaner. Running out of toothpaste. Okay, let me look up something a little better. Okay, I'm going to buy that toothpaste. And on and on and on. It'll take a while. It might take a year to really like turn everything over. Garbage bags, hey, can I get biodegradable, compostable bags? Like, what is it that I can do so that I'm reducing the toxic burden that I'm exposing myself to on a daily basis? And don't forget about your electronics. They're unfortunately toxic too. So make sure that you get yourself, EMF blockers. Those are commercially available. The way that you know that they work is you buy yourself a meter and you measure the load that you have in your home. So you turn your devices on and you walk around with the meter and you look at, how much exposure the devices are putting out. And there are, you can buy EMF blockers that you plug into your outlets that buffer and block the EMF signals. You can put them directly on the devices. So you can put one on your router, you can put one on your cell phone, your laptop. I have one on my phone, my laptop. The way that you know that they work is that you go, once you put the devices on, you go back and you look and you should see that the signals have been diminished, to safer levels. Now, unfortunately, there aren't really any great regulations, and so we don't really know what the safe levels are. Hasn't been studied in decades, and of course, we're being inundated with more and more, electromagnetic energy, not less. And so, we don't really have like a great sense of, well, what's dangerous, what's safe. So as low as you can get them is what's safer. Obviously, we're not going to be able to avoid everything, and the point isn't to avoid everything, otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy, right? So part of it is making sure that your body is in a solid place so that if it's exposed to things, your detox systems are functioning on all cylinders and those things are just removed from your body seamlessly, and there's no damage done, right? That's the key. And then the other key is reducing the load as much as you can. And that's the best we can do, and that's usually good enough. So there is a lot of attention that we have to pay to where we live, how we're being exposed, what's going into our bodies, what's going on our bodies, what we're inhaling. But once you kind of systematically go through and you just take your time, you don't try to get it all done in a week. It's impossible. But you download the ewg.org app. You start, just moving things out of the house. Now, the other, unfortunate issue is how do we dispose of these toxins? That has not yet been resolved either to a large extent. So whatever can be recycled is recycled. Whatever needs to be thrown away is thrown away. There are unfortunately not great methods to dispose of toxic things, and so that is still, pending. However, again, just making sure that we are solidifying our own bodies and that of our children is key to making sure that until technologies are developed that can neutralize these things in our environment, we can still be safe, still have really good and optimal body function, quality of life, because that's what it's all about. The last thing I wanted to talk about is high antioxidant foods. So many people are antioxidant deficient, and when I do testing in my office, the vast majority of people that I do testing on are deficient in their antioxidant function. Antioxidants are critical because they protect the body from damage. And so because we breathe oxygen and we need oxygen to live, that oxygen is a double-edged sword. So it's critical, obviously, we need it, otherwise we can't live. It's what allows us to be, human in many ways, as we get to use oxygen, make a ton of energy that powers the 40-50 trillion cells that we have, but the oxygen, as it's being used, has to be very carefully regulated in the body, has to be very carefully managed and handled, because it does damage. As a side effect, just as a byproduct of its utilization. So we call these things free radicals. or oxidation. So oxidation is kind of like rust, so we can rust from the inside. The best example that I tell my clients about all the time is if you take the peel off of an apple and expose it to the oxygen in the air, it will start to turn brown. But if you put lemon on it, lemon juice, if you squeeze some lemon juice on it, it will not turn brown because lemons are antioxidants. And so they help to kind of recycle the mechanisms of the body that protect us from oxidation or free radical damage. Free radicals damage our genes, they damage our DNA, they can increase the risk of many, many chronic diseases. They are critical to our immune system function. So if we are not consuming enough antioxidants, our mucous membranes are not protected. And so even with the best vaccines, they rely on us getting infected before they actually kick in and start to work. It's really protecting the mucous membranes of the body that's an additional really critical factor in preventing viral infections and bacterial infections from taking hold, because they all come in through our mucous membranes. And one of the biggest defenses in our mucous membranes are antioxidants. And so many vitamins and minerals serve an antioxidant function. So selenium is an antioxidant that's really critical. We also have CoQ10, glutathione, N-acetylcysteine, vitamin E is an antioxidant, alpha-lipoic acid, and vitamin C. Those are really critical antioxidants that we can find, as supplements, of course, but in food. B vitamins are also important, although they're not technically antioxidants. Again, they all help to run the cycles that make the energy that power the detoxification systems of the body. But the vitamins that I mentioned, the antioxidants, are critical for the recycling to prevent oxidative stress damage or free radical formation. So foods that contain like high antioxidant values are really, really important. So some of my favorites are dark chocolate, blueberries, coffee, green tea, and nuts. So walnuts, Brazil nuts, cranberries are another big one. Green leafy veggies have quite a bit. And some of the spices we mentioned earlier, like turmeric, cinnamon, ginger, have very high antioxidant levels. And so those are really important things to incorporate into your diet to make sure that you have a really good antioxidant capacity, which helps really to detox your body, remove waste from your body, and keep yourself super healthy. And so I hope you got a lot out of this podcast, and thank you so much for listening. Please check out our website, awakenwellnessnow.com. You can follow us on Instagram, connect with me on LinkedIn, and please take our burnout assessment if you haven't already. And we're introducing our corporate burnout resolution solutions as well. So please reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to share our corporate burnout risk tool with you, so we can score your risk and give you a personalized report of how you can start helping your team to operate at its best. And the key to corporate burnout is really to support all of the team members to be as healthy as possible at home, so that they bring their optimal health to the workplace. And that's how we get rid of corporate burnout. Corporate burnout isn't really a corporate issue the vast majority of the time. Although the corporation may contribute or may unmask the burnout, it is usually not where the burnout begins. And most experts are starting to agree on that point. The overall health and well-being of each and every team member is critical to reducing corporate burnout. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to share our burnout assessment with you. And until next time, thanks again for listening. Many, many blessings.